The first thing Owen Brackett saw when he pulled the shed door open at 6 in the morning was a sneaker, small, white, untied, sticking out from behind the old push mower. The second thing he saw was the rest of her. A girl, 15 or 16, curled on her side on a folded canvas drop cloth, a school backpack under her head, a thin grey hoodie pulled up over her face against the cold. She had not been there yesterday. She was breathing. Owen made himself check that first. Slow, even. The kind of breathing a person does when they are very tired and finally somewhere they think no one will look. He stepped back into the grey light of the driveway and stood holding the door with his fingertips. The November air smelled like wet leaves. His own house behind him, the brick split level he and Lena had bought 23 years ago, was dark on every floor because there was no one in it to turn a light on but him. Their daughter Hannah was 3 states away at college. Lena had been gone 14 months. He still kept the porch light burning at night because Lena had always said a dark porch was an unkind thing to do to a street. He was 53. His hands smelled like the coffee he had made and not yet drunk. He let the shed door rest against his shoulder and tried to think. He knew, in the loose way, a man knows the rhythm of his own block, who lived in the greenhouse to the right of his property, the Devaney's. The mother, Joelle, was a thin woman of about 40 who worked nights at a hospital across the river. The man she lived with, Carl, was not her husband and not the girl's father. The girl Tess, he was almost certain was the daughter from before. She rode the bus carrying a clarinet case that was bigger than she was. She had always waved at Lena. She had looked at him once across the lawn after the funeral in a way that made him understand she remembered Lena had been kind. Tess Devaney was now asleep in his shed. Owen closed the door without a sound. He went back into his own kitchen, set the cold coffee in the microwave without starting it, and stood with both hands flat on the counter. The right thing to do, he understood, was not one thing. It was a sequence of things, and the order of them mattered. He could call the police. He could walk across the driveway and knock on the Devaney's door and say, "Your daughter is in my yard." He could wake her himself and ask why. Each option, examined for 30 seconds, opened into a different room of consequences, and 3 of the 4 rooms had Tess Devaney getting hurt at the end of them. He went upstairs and pulled an old wool blanket from the cedar chest at the foot of his bed, Lena's blanket, the navy one with the cream stripe, and went back out to the shed. The girl had not moved. Owen knelt on the cold concrete 2 feet from her and laid the blanket over her sneakers and her hoodie and her bent knees, not quite touching her the way you cover a sleeping animal you do not want to spook. He did not speak. He stood up and looked at the rake leaning against the wall and the stack of paint cans that had stopped being paint years ago, and he understood, with the small, particular grief a man feels for his own usefulness, that his shed had become the safest place in a 15-year-old's world. He went back inside, picked up his phone, and stopped before he dialed. He set the phone on the counter and made a fresh pot of coffee instead. By 7 the wind had risen, and Owen was sitting on his back step in his old field jacket with 2 thermoses beside him when the shed door opened a careful inch and Tess Devaney's face appeared in the gap. She saw him on the step. She did not run. Her eyes went very wide and very still, and her hand, on the inside of the door, tightened until her knuckles went white. "Tess," Owen said, quietly, across the small distance of the yard, "I'm not going to tell anyone. I made coffee. There's cocoa too if you don't drink it." She did not move. "You can stay where you are," he said. "I'll set one of these inside the door and go back to the step." He stood up slowly, walked the 8 paces to the shed without looking at her, set the smaller thermos and a foil-wrapped bagel just inside the door on the canvas drop cloth, and walked back. He sat down again on the step. He did not look at the shed. For a long minute nothing happened. Then he heard the metal of the thermos cap and the small ordinary sound of a teenager unwrapping bread. "My mum thinks I'm at Marisol's," she said from inside the shed. "All right," Owen said. "Marisol doesn't know." "All right." She was quiet for the time it took to swallow. "Carl," she said, "got home early last night." Owen did not turn his head. He looked at the bare maple at the back of the yard and made his face do nothing. "Tess," he said, "did he put his hands on you?" "No," she said. Fast. Too fast, and then slower. Not last night. Last night he just yelled. He punched the wall by the kitchen. Mum was at work. He told me to go to my room, and I went out the window because the window's easier. "How long," Owen said carefully, "has the window been easier?" The thermos cap clicked. He thought she was buying time. "A while," she said. Owen rested his elbows on his knees. He let the quiet sit between them like a third person on the step. He had not been a person anyone confided in for 14 months. He had been a man people brought casseroles to and clapped on the shoulder at the grocery store and edged away from at parties because grief was contagious. He had forgotten that quietness was a thing you could offer to somebody. "Tess," he said, "I'm going to say a couple of things and then I'm going to shut up. You can stay in the shed today. I'll bring you lunch and leave it inside the door. I won't come in. I won't call your mum and I won't call Carl. But I am going to make one phone call because I have to, and I want you to know about it before I make it. Do you have anybody at all? An aunt? An uncle? A grandmother? Somebody not in that house? Inside the shed?" She breathed. "My Aunt Mira," she said. "My mum's sister. She lives in Quincy. She and my mum don't really talk." "Why don't they really talk?" "Because of Carl," Tess said. Owen nodded slowly to the maple tree. "Do you have her number?" he said. A long pause. "Yes," Tess said. By 9 that morning, Owen had 3 things on the kitchen table. A mug of coffee that was finally hot, a slip of paper with a Massachusetts phone number written in Tess's careful looping hand, and a wool blanket that the girl had folded and brought to the back step on her own before going back into the shed. He dialed. The woman who answered had the voice of someone who had picked up bad news on a phone before. "This is Mira Devaney. My name is Owen Brackett," Owen said. "I live next door to your sister. Your niece Tess is in my shed." A breath. "Is she hurt?" "No." "Is she safe?" "She's safe right now. She's been sleeping out here. I don't know how many nights. I gave her coffee and a bagel and a blanket. She's the one who gave me your number." There was a long silence on the line. Then Mira Devaney said, "I can be there in 2 hours." "All right." "Mr. Brackett." Owen, thank you for not calling anyone else first." He looked at the slip of paper on the table. "She did the picking. I just did the dialing." Mira Devaney arrived at 11:15 in a grey Subaru that was older than her niece. She was a small woman in jeans and a black peacoat with grey at her temples that Owen guessed had not been there a year ago, and the same careful, level eyes Tess had. She did not go to the Devaney house. She came up Owen's driveway and stopped at the foot of his steps. "Where is she?" Mira said. "In the shed. She knows you're coming. She walked out twice this morning to see if your car was here yet." Mira pressed 2 fingers to the bridge of her nose. "All right, Owen. Here's what I need to do. I need to talk to Tess first. Then I need to go knock on my sister's door, and I would very much like, if you are willing, for you to stand on your side of the property line while I do it. Not in their yard, on yours. Just so a witness exists." "All right," Owen said. "I'm not asking you to do more than that." "I know." She held his eyes for a beat. "Why didn't you call the police?" "Because she would have gone back in tonight," Owen said, "and next time the window wouldn't be easier." Mira's mouth pulled in at one corner, not a smile, but something that knew him a little better than it had a minute ago. She nodded once and walked past him to the shed. Owen could not hear what they said inside. He heard the rise and fall of 2 voices, and at one point he heard Tess cry quick, surprised, almost angry, and then he heard Mira hush her, the way a person hushes a sister. When they came out, Tess was wearing Mira's peacoat over her hoodie, and Mira was carrying the backpack, and the 2 of them walked across Owen's driveway and across the property line and up the cracked walk of the Devaney house together. Owen stood at the line with his hands in his jacket pockets, exactly where he had been told. The door opened on the second knock. Joelle Devaney stood in it in a hospital scrub top, her hair flat from sleep, her face going through 3 different expressions before settling on the last one, which Owen had seen on the faces of women in church pews and in courthouses, and once, briefly, on Lena's own face the week before the diagnosis. The look of a person who has been waiting for a knock without knowing she was waiting. Mira said something quiet. Joelle started to shake her head. Mira said something else. Behind Joelle, in the dim of the hallway, Owen saw movement. A man stepped into the doorway. He was big and slack-faced from sleep, and he was already saying something Owen could not hear, but the tone carried, and the tone was the same tone Owen had heard through a closed window once. Mira did not move. She put one hand flat in the air between herself and the man, palm out, the way you stop traffic, and she said, clearly enough now that Owen could hear it across the driveway, "Tess is leaving with me today. You and I do not need to have a conversation." The man said something Owen did not want to repeat to himself. Mira looked back, just once, over her shoulder. Owen took 1 step, only one, onto his own driveway, not theirs, in plain view, hands still in his pockets. He did not say anything. He did not need to. He just stood where the man could see him and let his presence be the second person Mira had asked him to be. The man in the doorway looked at Owen for a long moment. Owen did not look away. The man's mouth made a shape, and then his shoulders dropped half an inch, and he stepped back into the dim of the hall and was gone. Joelle Devaney was crying now, quietly, both hands over her mouth. Tess walked into the house with her aunt's hand on her shoulder. They were inside, Owen guessed, less than 12 minutes. When they came back out, Tess was carrying a duffel and a clarinet case and a small framed picture of a woman who must have been her grandmother. Mira had one arm around her. Joelle stood in the doorway in her scrub top and watched her daughter walk down the path and lifted one hand once, in something that was not quite a wave and not quite goodbye, more like an acknowledgement that the world had finally moved. Mira put Tess in the passenger seat of the grey Subaru and shut the door gently. Then she walked the 8 paces back across Owen's driveway to him. "I'm taking her home with me tonight," she said. "Tomorrow we go to a family lawyer I know in Quincy. Joelle is going to need her own help, and I cannot give it to her with Tess in that house. I can give it to her with Tess in mine." "All right," Owen said. "Owen." "Yes. Tess wants to know if she can write you." Owen had to look at the maple at the back of his yard for a second. "Of course," he said. "And," Mira looked at him with the level eyes again, "I am going to come back next weekend. I want to talk to her teachers and her band director and a couple of other people on this side of the river. I will not impose on you, but if a person needed a coffee in a kitchen on Saturday morning, would there be a kitchen?" Owen looked at her. He understood, with a clarity that he had not expected to feel about anything ever again, that he was being asked something larger than coffee by a woman who did not yet know she was asking it, and who would not push if he could not answer. "There will be a kitchen," he said. She nodded. She did not smile. She walked back to the car. Tess looked at Owen through the passenger window as the car backed out to the Devaney driveway. She lifted one hand the way her mother had not quite waved, and she held it up against the glass for a count of 3, and then she pressed her forehead against it for the count after that. Then the car was at the corner, and then it was around the corner, and then it was gone. Owen stood in his own driveway for a long time. The wind moved the bare maple at the back of his yard. His coffee, in its mug on the kitchen table, was cold again. He went inside, washed the mug, set it upside down on the dish rack, and walked back out to the shed. He folded the canvas drop cloth. He picked up the wool blanket Tess had returned and shook it once and held it to his face because it smelled of cold air and a little of girl's shampoo, and underneath both of those, faintly, of his own house of the cedar chest and of the navy stripe Lena had liked. He folded it carefully. He carried it inside. He put it back where it belonged. Saturday morning came and the grey Subaru pulled up at 9. Tess was not in it. She was at her aunt's, doing the careful work of starting a new school in the middle of November. But Mira got out and stood at the bottom of Owen's steps with 2 cups of coffee from a place in Quincy that Owen had never heard of, and Owen opened the door and stepped aside. She came in. She set the coffees on the kitchen counter. They did not say much that first hour. She asked about the house. He told her about Lena and about Hannah at college and about the porch light. She told him about her own divorce, 10 years past, and about her work as a paralegal, and about the spare room she had spent last weekend painting. They drank the coffee from Quincy, and then they drank a pot of his. When she left at noon, she stopped in the doorway and looked at the kitchen, at the 2 mugs in the sink, at the table that did not look so wide anymore, and she said, "Next Saturday." "Next Saturday," he said. She nodded once. She walked to her car. Owen stood in his open doorway in the November sun and watched her go. The porch light was still on from the night before. He reached up without looking and turned it off, because for the first time in 14 months, he understood, without needing to be told, that somebody had come, somebody had been helped, somebody was going to come again, and that all 3 of those somebodies, against everything he had let himself believe, included him. He closed the door gently. He went to put on a fresh pot of coffee for one, knowing already that next week the pot would be for 2.